Oscar Piastri has just detonated the first bomb of the Qatar weekend by taking the sprint pole with a lap so precise that it left the entire McLaren garage speechless and forced the championship fight into absolute chaos. The internal session data shows that Piastri delivered a 1-minute 20.055 lap while Lando Norris made a critical mistake in the final corner and dropped to third, turning McLaren's controlled championship plan into a complete psychological battle. Even more shocking is that Piastri is now only 24 points behind Norris, tied with Max Verstappen, and with 2 races left the title fight is no longer a 2-driver scenario but a 3-way war. And before I show you why today's performance may completely rewrite the final 2 rounds of the championship, make sure you subscribe right now because the Qatar sprint could become the turning point of the entire 2025 season. Oscar Piastri arrived in Qatar with pressure weighing heavily on him after the Las Vegas disaster, yet the Australian delivered a session that immediately reset the tone of the championship. The internal report confirms that his confidence returned the moment he hit the track, with McLaren's high-speed efficiency blending perfectly with the layout of the Lusail circuit. His 1-minute 20.055 lap was described by analysts as clinical, and the execution showed no hesitation in any sector. This performance established him as a real title contender once again and marked one of the strongest mental responses of the season. The day, however, was defined not only by Piastri but also by what went wrong for Lando Norris. Norris entered Qatar with a commanding lead of 390 points and knew that a strong sprint result could seal the championship by Sunday. Yet during the final push lap of the session he carried too much speed into the last corner, touched the gravel, and threw away the chance to start ahead of his teammate. His admission afterwards showed complete awareness of the mistake and the pressure that now surrounds him, with Piastri starting directly ahead in clean air. Max Verstappen meanwhile endured another difficult outing that exposed the ongoing technical weaknesses of the Red Bull car. Verstappen reported uncontrollable bouncing and steering issues which prevented him from attacking the curbs. The session ended with him in 6th position, nearly half a second behind Piastri and behind his own teammate. This confirmed that Red Bull is still struggling with ride height and correlation issues, which makes it extremely difficult for Verstappen to stay in the fight during a weekend that rewards stability over aggression. Free practice 1 earlier in the day provided the first signs of McLaren's dominance as Piastri led the session with a 1-minute 20.924 lap and Norris followed only 58 thousandths behind. This pair of times showed that the MCL39 is the best car at handling the lateral loads of the Lusail circuit. All teams focused on tire degradation analysis because the asphalt is known for destroying tires quickly, and McLaren's ability to manage this degradation may be decisive in the remaining sessions of the weekend. Ferrari and Mercedes faced difficulties in these early laps. George Russell surprised the field later in the day with a 2nd place in sprint qualifying, yet the Mercedes still struggled with rear tire stability in the high-speed sections. For Lewis Hamilton the issues were deeper as he experienced another early elimination in sprint qualifying, continuing what several British media outlets describe as a challenging debut season with Ferrari. These signs confirm that Ferrari enters this weekend as either the 3rd or 4th fastest team, which will affect their ability to interfere with the championship fight. The championship landscape became dramatically tighter after the double McLaren disqualification in Las Vegas, and Piastri's pole only intensified the situation. Norris now leads with 390 points while both Piastri and Verstappen sit at 366. With 58 points remaining over the final 2 weekends, the title can swing in multiple directions depending on how the sprint unfolds. The report highlights that Norris needs to outscore both rivals by 2 points this weekend to become champion, and Piastri's pole position makes that scenario far less likely. The central issue for McLaren is that the Qatar weekend has exposed cracks in the championship strategy. Piastri's pole is both a strength and a complication. It confirms that the team has the fastest car under these conditions, yet it places Norris in a vulnerable position at exactly the wrong moment. Starting 3rd with George Russell ahead creates an unpredictable scenario because Russell has nothing to lose and may interfere with McLaren's plan. The internal report emphasizes that McLaren cannot control the first corner dynamic, and this lack of control adds emotional pressure on Norris, who must avoid losing more points to his teammate. Another problem arises from the psychological momentum shift. Before the weekend, Norris held the position of the clear favorite, yet his error in the final corner of sprint qualifying suggests the pressure is beginning to affect him. Meanwhile, Piastri enters the sprint with a renewed sense of confidence, which becomes dangerous when a championship contender finds rhythm at the exact moment their teammate stumbles. The team now must manage 2 drivers with opposing emotional trajectories heading into a session where every point carries championship implications. The growing revival of Piastri complicates the internal command structure of McLaren. Norris has been their primary title hope, yet the numbers show that Piastri remains very much alive in the fight. The internal report acknowledges that team orders are becoming a topic of discussion even though Zak Brown publicly claimed they would not shift their approach. The reality is that if the sprint tightens the points further, McLaren may face a decision that impacts the final standings of the season and the future relationship between their two drivers. The performance gap between McLaren and Red Bull on this circuit also introduces a strategic problem for Norris. Verstappen's sixth-place start means he is unlikely to challenge Piastri directly but can still act as a spoiler for Norris if the Dutchman makes progress. The internal classification notes that Verstappen remains mathematically alive and will exploit any opening created by McLaren's internal tension. The risk for Norris is that focusing too much on Piastri may expose him to pressure from behind, which could cost him essential sprint points. A further complication is the tire regulation imposed for the main race, which limits each set to a maximum of 25 laps. Although this does not directly affect the sprint session, it forces teams to plan Friday running with strict consideration for tire life. McLaren's advantage in tire management may help them later, but Norris's mistake in sprint qualifying means he must now fight harder in the sprint and use more tire energy than anticipated, which could influence his weekend strategy overall. The final problem lies in how narrow the championship margin has become. With only 24 points separating Norris from both Piastri and Verstappen, the sprint has become a pivotal moment that could redefine the title. Norris needed a calm Friday to stabilize the situation, yet instead he now enters the sprint with the possibility of losing a significant portion of his lead. Piastri's pole ensures that the first lap of the sprint will be one of the most influential moments of his entire career, and the pressure on Norris to respond without error has never been higher. The first area of engineering pressure appears in how McLaren configured the MCL39 for Qatar. The report confirms that the team adjusted their floor and suspension settings to avoid the plank wear problems that caused the Las Vegas disqualification. These modifications improved stability through high-speed corners and allowed Piastri to extract the maximum aerodynamic efficiency from the car. However, this setup demands precision from the driver, which explains why Norris's final corner mistake was so costly. The car is extremely fast but sensitive, which increases the mental strain on both drivers as they approach the sprint. Pirelli's tire limit rule plays a major role in defining the weekend. Because each set is restricted to 25 laps, teams must spread their usage across the sessions with extreme discipline. McLaren handled free practice 1 efficiently by completing targeted long runs and limiting unnecessary mileage. This approach allowed Piastri and Norris to enter sprint qualifying with fresher tires compared to rivals. The internal data shows that McLaren's tire management advantage may become decisive in the final 2 races, particularly when Ferrari and Mercedes have struggled to manage rear tire temperature on this circuit. Red Bull meanwhile sits under significant engineering stress. The internal report describes the RB21 as unpredictable, with bouncing behavior and steering inconsistencies that prevented Verstappen from attacking curbs during sprint qualifying. Engineers attempted to raise the ride height to reduce plank wear, but this adjustment reduced downforce in critical corners. As a result, Verstappen is now fighting with a car that cannot generate consistent grip, which undermines his ability to close the points gap to Norris and Piastri. The report also highlights Mercedes as the potential disruptor. George Russell's second place in sprint qualifying indicates that Mercedes benefits from a car that performs well in cooler conditions and in high-speed corners. While the Mercedes still struggles with rear tire degradation, the 1-lap pace suggests that Russell could influence the first lap dynamics in the sprint by attacking Piastri or blocking Norris. This adds an external engineering variable that both McLaren drivers must factor into their strategies. Ferrari continues to operate below expectations due to aerodynamic instability at high speed, which caused Lewis Hamilton to be eliminated in the first sprint qualifying segment. The internal briefing notes that Ferrari cannot match the lateral load capacity of the McLaren and Mercedes packages, which positions them at a disadvantage across the weekend. These limitations mean that Ferrari is unlikely to affect the championship battle unless unusual circumstances arise. The final engineering pressure appears in the championship context itself. With only 58 points remaining, McLaren must extract maximum performance while avoiding mistakes that jeopardize their advantage. This environment intensifies the impact of every decision, from tire usage to pit lane timing to the aggressiveness of the first lap in the sprint. The engineering teams must support 2 drivers with different needs while ensuring the car remains fast and reliable. Every lap now carries championship weight, and the data from Friday confirms that the margins are tighter than at any point this season.